Local history that changed a nation. The Gettysburg Address. 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty, and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation, or any nation so conceived and so dedicated, can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it, far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little know, nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. One of only 5 copies in Abraham Lincoln's hand of the Gettysburg Address lives here at the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Museum in Springfield. And we're kind of fortunate that Ken Burns decided not to come here because the real experts on the Gettysburg Address and Abraham Lincoln's life reside here. And Dr. James Cornelius is one of them. You're the curator of the Lincoln collection.
Yes, Mark.
And it's a big day, isn't it? The 150th anniversary of the Gettysburg
It's a
Address.
very big day. Everybody likes round numbers. President Lincoln liked round numbers, and this is a major event because it gives us a chance to remember our nation's history and our founding ideals all at once.
What is it about the Gettysburg Address that resonates with people and stays with them through their life?
Well, I think it works at different levels for different people. It's very short. Almost anybody can memorize it, and lots of people have. It also has allusions to biblical language. It has allusions to our Declaration of Independence. It has the necessary part of it that's about consecrating the dead, the brave soldiers, and it speaks to our future, that we need a new birth of freedom to complete this nation, this union.
You know, it's interesting. I said that there are 5 copies in his hand, and
Yeah.
one of them is here. And you told me, I didn't know this, they're all different.
Yeah, all 5 are different,
Yeah.
a little bit. There are 2 more or less incomplete. They kind of look like rough drafts. One was a sort of a rough draft that were left behind with his secretaries in Washington. And then there's one that he read from at Gettysburg, which no longer exists. But then the one here, he wrote out at the request of Edward Everett after the event, Edward Everett being the main speaker that day for 2 hours. And Everett's copy and Lincoln's handwritten copy were sold for charity for wounded soldiers in New York City the next spring. And it's the first one. We're very proud of this here because we have Everett's notebook. We've got the whole day's events here in Springfield. But it's the first one in which the words "under God" appear. Those are not in the first 2 drafts that he left behind, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom.
Let's visit with the family here for a
Yes.
second, okay? Because during this time, and much of this program is going to be what was going on with Lincoln at the time preceding the Gettysburg Address.
Yeah.
Some personal things, real personal issues were going on in Abraham Lincoln's life. For instance, the health of his son.
Yes. Well, Tad had smallpox at the time. A few days before the president was scheduled to go up to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, Tad was in bed. And the president himself wasn't feeling very well either. But we don't think that Mr. Lincoln would have skipped the trip if he'd felt kind of sickly himself. But he was worried about Tad, and so was Mary. But their family doctor told them, Tad's getting better. He'll be all right. And this was a big relief. And while the president was in Gettysburg, he got a telegram from Mary back in Washington saying, Tad's better today, too. So this put the president's mind at ease a little bit more before he gave the speech.
Some people think, well, they know Tad had smallpox. Some people think Abraham had smallpox.
Yeah, he seems to have had a kind of a weak variety of it, a mild case of it called varioloid, not the full-blown problem. And he may have given it to Tad. Tad may have given it to him. Abraham may have given it to the black man William Johnson, his servant.
Who's William Johnson?
William Johnson was a black man who came with the Lincolns from Springfield to Washington, D.C. on the train in 1861 and was the president's manservant and his contact with the African-American community in Washington, the way Mary Lincoln had Elizabeth Keckley, much better known figure, as her contact with African-Americans. And so Lincoln took William along as his sort of friend, bodyguard, inspiration. He probably finished writing up the last final touches on the Gettysburg Address in the presence of William Johnson on the night of the 18th in Gettysburg.
Now, William Johnson met his untimely demise because of smallpox, is that right?
That's right,
And
yes.
he may have contracted it from Abraham Lincoln.
Well, somebody gave it to somebody, all in that circle. They're all traveling together and living together. Lots of people had it at the time. General McClellan had a bad case of it 2 years earlier. And so the Lincolns were very worried. Their son, Willie, had died in the White House the previous year of typhoid. Unfortunately, as you say, William Johnson died of smallpox in early January, about 6-7 weeks after the trip to Gettysburg. And President Lincoln paid for his burial at Arlington National Cemetery. And the gravestone is still there. It says, William H. Johnson, citizen. Citizen.
Mark Depew, we can't really judge Lincoln's mood and what was going on in his life leading up to the Gettysburg Address unless we talk about the Civil War, because he lived that war. It consumed him, didn't it?
It absolutely did. And an example of that, I think, is that he spent a huge amount of time always at the War Office's telegraph office, so he could hear the messages coming back from his various battle commanders across the country. And it's interesting at this point in time in American history, what's different is you've got railroads that changes the dynamics of the war altogether, makes these things much larger battles than ever would have been before. And you've also got the telegraph, which makes instantaneous communication with the battlefield commanders. Once you get on the battlefield itself, it's still the old-fashioned signal flags and couriers and things like that, but he could find out almost immediately what was happening, as long as you can get to a telegraph wire and send those messages back.
As this booklet, On Lincoln's Mind, put out by the Papers of Abraham Lincoln, we're going to learn that, boy, during this tense time, during the middle of the Civil War, the presidency and all the matters associated to the presidency does not stop, does it? It doesn't matter what's going on. Daniel Stoll, you and your colleagues put this together. It's a remarkable collection of day-to-day activities that the president was confronted with.
Right. We are always amazed at the number of different issues he had to deal with on a daily basis and move from one to another so rapidly and make decisions in some cases of life and death.
He was, of course, every president was, but he was constantly bombarded with requests for help. People wanted to get a relative a job. People wanted, a grieving mother would want her son's body back from the war front. Yeah. Things like this. And you and I have just enough time to go into a few of these requests. Some of them are a little offbeat. Some of them are daily. Right. And some of them are kind of remarkable in some ways. A lot of people would not be aware that during the first instance in your booklet here, you talk about the fact that he's requested to do something about these riots in New York City. Right. What in the world was going on?
Well, New York City was very upset, or a lot of people in New York City were very upset about the federal drafts. And this is just literally in the days after the Battle of Gettysburg. And unfortunately, the opposition to the draft turned deadly. It turned into an opposition toward all things related to the federal government, and it turned into a racist draft. So a lot of, or a racist riot, and so a lot of the victims of the draft riots were African Americans living in New York City. And ironically, soldiers who had recently been at the Battle of Gettysburg had to be dispatched to New York City to help restore order.
The booklet, On Lincoln's Mind, is available here at the library and museum throughout the week of the anniversary of the Gettysburg Address. And the Gettysburg Address itself, one of only 5 written in Lincoln's hand, is on display here through the weekend after Thanksgiving. Now, this has been a special presentation of the Gettysburg Address, Reflections from Lincoln's Hometown. Thanks for watching.